my name's Mike Edwards. We're going to be reviewing Barber Raceway in Alabama. This footage comes from a GSX-R 600 I was riding there. Barber itself is an awesome track. It's got a large range of corners to play with. It's got some multi-apex long radius corners, some much tighter sections to deal with, some big drop-offs, blind entries, blind rises. It's a real rider's circuit. We're just about to go around the last corner here, coming up into the start-finish straight. We're going to talk about this particular corner in more detail towards the end of the lap, obviously. But let's get round here and onto the straight and see how we get on. Really important that ultimately you get that corner right, because it's obviously the run up to the line. So getting a good exit speed there is particularly important. Turn one. Big issue with turn one and the approach is you can't see it. It's not until you're in the braking area between the 3 and 4 marker, roughly speaking, because this performance of the GSX-R 600 is kind of midway up to a superbike. A superbike you may be braking at 4. The 600 like this is roughly between the two. And if you're riding maybe a stock 400 or something like that, you'll be much closer to the 3 mark before we'll be braking. But that's the sort of thing that ultimately you'll need to decide where you are and where you're comfortable with your particular machine. Either way, at this point in the circuit, all you can see is the track disappears. It's obviously a left-hander. You'll suss that out by reviewing your track map and before you get there. And as we're running into turn one, it's not until we're approaching the 1 marker and just after that 1 marker is where the corner really starts to reveal itself. At this point in the track, we're looking for our tip-in reference, which is approximately where the curb starts. Now, at that point, we need to be easing back on the brakes as we're approaching the tip-in. And as we get to the tip-in point, we're still braking really hard at this point and trailing our braking towards the apex. Now, the issue here is because of the drop-off, is you don't want to be hanging onto the brake for too long because you're asking an awful lot of the front tyre at this point. So by the time the apex pops into view, which by this point you're roughly halfway across the track, realistically you want to be finished your braking. So trail it to mid-track and then run in on usually a closed throttle to close to the apex. Now the track here goes in it kind of levels out slightly and there's a small rise as you go into turn 2. It's pretty fast, to be fair, and when you're running through the corner, at the apex, pick the throttle up and start to develop the throttle out towards the right-hand side of the track. You've maximised the corner there, you've maximised your speed round turn 1. Now turn 2 is a huge, long, it's almost an omega, it almost comes back on itself. It's a lot more than 180 degrees. And because of the length of the radius, there's not a huge point in trying to get over to the left-hand side of the track here to get a better entrance into it. Generally speaking, I stay over to the right-hand side of the track and a short driver throttle and an ease back and a light dab of brakes on the way into the corner. Again, because of the radius of the corner, try to maintain your pace, which is generally speaking a positive throttle around the corner. And the amount of throttle you put on at this point, if you put on too much throttle, the bike's going to start to run wide. If you don't put enough throttle on, the bike will fall in towards the curb. So it's about being able to stay on the line that you want and carry as much momentum around the corner as you can. Now, what we're looking for at this point is there's a short curb, which is about 3/4 of the way around the corner. And as soon as this curb starts to come into view, it's only maybe 50 to 30 yards long, something like that. And roughly halfway along it is our time to start developing the throttle out of the corner. Now, at this point on the track, what we're actually looking for is way up here, way up into the distance. And that's the drift out point for us, the drift out curve. So we're going to be picking the throttle up here and starting to develop the throttle out of the corner. Now, what we're looking for now is this drift out curve here. Now, generally speaking, we'll be accelerating at this point now really hard. As we get towards the curve, the start of the curve here, our next point, what we're looking for, is the top of the rise. Now at the top of the rise here, the important thing about that is the corner isn't finished. This turn 3 effectively is an over rise, and it carries on turning right. So that's a bit just over the rise is the apex for us. Let's change that colour to make it easier to see. Just over the rise is the apex of the corner, but obviously it continues round. So as we start to pick up our throttle even harder now, by now you're pretty much on full gas driving up the rise. As we're coming up to the top of the rise where the apex is, we can start to see this tower in the distance. Now, I use the tower as a point of reference more than anything else. The apex is just at the top of the rise here, roughly halfway along this short curve here on the right. But our drift out point is going to be to the right of the tower. Don't just go in a straight line here. If your trajectory at this point is basically straight on like that, you're going to be running off track. Our trajectory from the apex onwards is much more like that, which will take us down the track. So popping up over the rise. At this point, you may need to sort of ease back a little bit on the throttle. Superbikes, for instance, and 600s to a point, will want to start to wheelie here, but more importantly, because of the rise, you're effectively going over a hump. The rear is going to start spinning up, and you start to lose traction here. Now you can't quite see from the apex the drift out curve, so you've still got to keep turning right, keep going to the right of the tower. And as you pop up onto the straight, the curve starts to show itself down here. Now it's only a short straight, a relatively short straight down to the next corner, which once again is over a rise and down into a dip. So we basically got to work our way fairly quickly over to the right hand side of the track. And we're now looking for our braking reference, which again is between the 4 and the 3 marker, approximately. So we're over to the right hand side of the track, and as we're approaching the end of our braking, which is between the 1 marker and the edge of the curb, the corner starts to reveal itself. Now this particular corner has the apex curb has 3 distinct little bumps in it. Now the little bumps, you'll see them as we approach them. It's the first one and the second one we want to focus as using them as apexes. The second one is the main apex. But the corner itself, after the second one, starts to open out onto another straight to take us down away towards the end of the circuit. At this point in the track, because we're still, the bike's up in a straight line, it's full brakes at this point. And as we're approaching towards the end of the right-hand curve here, at this point we start our tip into the corner, still braking hard, but easing back progressively on the brakes. This is the first of the bumps we talked about. And we're sort of aiming towards that, but mainly the second one, which is just out of vision here. Now, by now, we want to be kind of basically off the brakes. We've trailed them to about 3/4 of the way across the track. Off the brakes now, picking up the throttle just to maintain a little bit of momentum around the corner. Don't open the throttle here and start to drive too hard, because again, trajectory at this point is kind of taking us out that way. We want to get to a little bit further around the circuit, so our trajectory is much more where we want to be going. It's the old story really. If you open the throttle too early, okay, you start to accelerate, but if you accelerate in the wrong direction, it's not great news. So passing the second of those bumps I talked about in the circuit, the third one is just out of view here. Now from here, the circuit or the corner starts to really open out, so we can start our true acceleration out of the corner. And as the straight itself appears into view, by now we're pretty much on full throttle and letting the bike run out towards the right-hand side of the circuit. And there's the straight in front of us. There's a slight rise in the circuit here, and that'll create a little bit of movement with the rear tyres, like kind of sliding away from you. And maybe even on the superbikes, for instance, you'll get a little bit of wheelie point here. It's something you need to deal with. But our aim point now is this gantry down here, where we want to be right over to the left-hand side of the track, ready for the next section. Quite bumpy along this section, to be fair. In fact, the whole circuit has quite a few bumps in it. So we're approaching the next section. Our braking reference is round about between 4 and 3 again. It's quite important here because this corner leads us down into a chicane, and again there's quite a steep drop off into it. So we've got to get the majority of our braking done by the tipping point, which is towards the end of the curve here. And we want to be sort of still braking hard to this point. Now, the apex of this corner is where this Armco barrier is here. In line of vision from here is about here. So it's just after the end of the Armco. But obviously the end of the start of the curve is kind of at this point. So we have to round some of the curve to get to the apex. So then, still braking hard, easing back off the brakes, and arrive at the apex. This point, definitely you want to be off the brakes, and because of the drop off, you may get round some of the corner, and as the bike comes upright or starts to come upright, at this point you've got to make a decision. The decision mainly is, are you going to run over what's coming up, which is this curb here, or do you want to run round the curb? But that makes it a definite right, left, right, where the option is running straight across the curb. You ultimately get into a slightly better position the other side of it, and you get there faster. But of course, over this hump itself, you really can't do a lot of braking. I would suggest off the brakes until you're over the hump, and then a little squeeze of brakes just before you drop the bike over to the right. Now this curb here, or the apex of this corner, there's a storm drain starts here, and it's roughly at that point is where you want to be aiming for. So if we come back out the corner a little bit, we've come over the hump, you can just about start to see around about this point where your apex of the corner is, because it's a long kind of opening out corner past the museum. But if you drive straight away for the curb here, your trajectory once again at that point is going to be very much off track. Where if we go for a slightly later apex, which is here, by that point in the track, our trajectory is a much better trajectory out of the corner. Okay, so let's get there. So as we drop towards the storm drain, which is to our right here, this is where we'll pick the throttle up and start a long, progressive throttle driving out of the corner. Now use all of the track here, but don't be in a rush to get over to the left. If you've accelerated from the apex, you're going to naturally get over to this side of the track, and that's a really important feature of any circuit really, is get used to it, using the circuit to your best advantage. If you're coming out of the circuit, out of that corner, and you're mid-track here, and then all of a sudden you start driving hard, you're going to end up here, and if you're not used to, it's going to start causing you to back off the throttle, or you start to worry yourself. So get used to using all of the circuits at this point. Now our aim point now is out towards this really fast chicane, but we're going to be aiming for somewhere around here in the track. So once again, let's get up towards that point. We full throttle out here, over to the right, and roughly halfway along this curve on the right here, our tipping point, still full gas at this point. And you can, because of this is effectively a really high-speed chicane, you can be pretty much on full noise until about 3/4 of the way across the track, where at this point in the track, you'll need to be off the throttle, light dab of brakes. Just for me, it's more of a confidence brake more than anything else. But the issue with this chicane is the left going into it is a lot less radius than the right. That means the work for you isn't to get to this point. The work for you is getting through the chicane and not running out of track on the exit. Now the drift out point for us is down here somewhere. So the apex is here, so we've got quite a lot of corner to get around. So what I would suggest here is, as we get into the corner, as we're going past this apex on the left here, is as this point comes up, start our change of direction. Get on with the change of direction rapidly. If you wait till you're a little bit further along, if you wait till sort of this point in the track and then decide to turn right or change direction, you're going to start A, maybe missing this apex, and B, the more likely is running out of room on the exit. So rapid change of direction, quite a late apex towards the end of the curve here on the right, towards the end of this curve. And our drift out point now is once again quite a long way up the track. So our aim point is right up here. So developing the throttle out onto the straight. Once again, you will naturally use all of the track. The curbs at Barber aren't very wide, and a lot of them are relatively bumpy. Some of them you can use, but generally speaking, I'd use them as reference points as opposed to driving on them. The exception is going to the last chicane, where you go over the big curb down to the museum corner. Another fast part of the circuit, run down towards this left-right section. Really deep on the brakes. And we'll be down to sort of probably around the 3 marker at this point. And it's a really strong brake into this. Midway along the curb, start to tip in. Now, on this particular lap, I'm slightly hampered by the rider in front. He's going pretty well. However, he starts to block my vision, to be fair. And I'm looking to apex roughly halfway along this curb. Rapid change of direction. Now, at this point in the track, it goes in a slight dip and over a rise. It compromises 2 things, this rise. One is our vision of where the track's actually going at that point. And 2, just as we crest the rise going out of this corner, we're back to that loss of traction due to usually wheel spin. So it's a fairly late apex round this corner. Towards the end of the curve here is our ultimate aim, 3/4 to the end, and then up and over the rise. Now, again, your aim point is sort of midway down between the fencing here and the trees out to the left. That's where we want to be aiming our bike. And then accelerating over the rise. And as you go over the rise, the circuit opens out in front of you. Now, this next section is a ballsy kind of corner. It's one of the ones where you ease back on the throttle over the rise, dropping into it. Some people that have a comfort brake here, I tend to like to run into the corner just on a closed throttle. And as you're approaching the apex of the corner, a light burst of acceleration out of it. Because that's the first kink in the corner. The corner kind of continues round, but it kind of opens out slightly for a short while. And then the corner starts to tighten up again. Now, in front of us is the slip road to the paddock. It's not the easiest thing to see, but as soon as that pops into view at this point, we want to be definitely off the throttle here now and braking as hard as possible, but because of the angular lean, it's more like a trail into the corner. Now, this is the penultimate right-hand corner. It's arguably, for me, the most important corner on the circuit because it leads to the last corner, which is the run to the line. There's a very short curb, and we want to be 3/4 the way along our apex. And it leads out into a short straight down to the last corner. Now, the run out here, we'll be picking the throttle and trying to drive out of this corner. And it's a compromise, really. If you get a really fast exit out of this corner, what it tends to do is push you way out onto the left. It then makes it really hard work to get back to the right for the good entry into the last corner. So suggestions here are a squeeze of throttle out of it, but focus on getting back over to the right-hand side of the circuit. So we're in a really good place, about 3/4 the way along this curb, for our tipping into the last corner. it is a compromise, whichever way you view it. You can be super fast here, but you're going to lose time out of the left. If you're too slow here, you get great track position, but there'll be people coming underneath you here into the last corner. So it's a compromise, whichever way you view it. So 3/4 of the way along this curve here, we're looking for our apex, which is roughly here, and importantly the drift out point, which is way up here. So vision is important, always vision is important, but here we want to bag where the apex is, but be starting to look now where we want to be ultimately going with the bike. Again, we're back to that trajectory thing. If we get to the corner, if we apex too early in this, let's get a little closer. If our apex here was too early, say at this point in the circuit with our apex, our trajectory would be out there. Now, if you've come fast around the last corner, drifted out over to the left, and then ended up apexing too early, that's what's going to happen. But if we've managed to get back over to the right-hand side of the track, with a late tip in and apexing much later around the corner, our trajectory is a huge amount better. So, back to the corner itself. 3/4 of the way around, picking the throttle up on the run into the corner to keep good momentum into the corner, and 3/4 of the way around the corner, pick up the throttle onto the straight. Now, if your vision here is not high enough, basically, if you're tending to look for the drift out curve, that's where you're going to end up going. Our vision here wants to be right up here. You'll always look where you want to go, not ultimately where the bike's going. That's where you want to be looking. And in doing that, it helps you to get to that point. And then it's full gas onto the straight, staying off the curb because it's bumpy, and then a run to the line. I hope that's worked for you. I hope it helps. Please go to Barber. It's an awesome facility. You'll have a really good time there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Okay, now let's watch the lap uninterrupted so you can see and listen to the bike, listen where the throttle comes on, how hard it comes on, see where I'm braking and so on. Please enjoy.